Most people quit sugar expecting one obvious outcome: weight loss. They imagine the scale moving, the waist shrinking, or cravings fading away after a few difficult days. But the body does not experience sugar removal as a cosmetic change. It experiences it as the loss of a long-standing regulatory signal. And that distinction matters, because what happens first is not fat burning, not metabolism speeding up, and not even hunger in the way most people think. The first system to react is your kidneys. The moment sugar intake drops, blood glucose stabilizes downward and insulin signaling follows immediately. Insulin is commonly described as a blood sugar hormone, but in everyday physiology it also acts as a powerful controller of fluid balance and internal pressure. For years, higher sugar intake keeps insulin elevated, and elevated insulin quietly instructs the kidneys to retain sodium. Wherever sodium is held, water stays with it. This means a significant portion of what many people assume is normal body weight is actually fluid retained under hormonal command. When insulin drops, that command is lifted. Sodium begins leaving the body, and water follows closely behind. This is why the first physical sensation after quitting sugar is often not hunger, but head pressure, lightheadedness, or a sharper headache within the first day. This is not a sign of weakness or failure. It is the body recalibrating fluid regulation in real time. While the kidneys adjust silently, something far more noticeable unfolds inside the nervous system, and this defines the first 3 days. Sugar does not merely fuel cells. It conditions expectation. Repeated sugar exposure trains the brain's reward circuitry to anticipate predictable dopamine signals. Not pleasure itself, but the promise of it. That small internal message that something rewarding is about to happen. When sugar disappears abruptly, dopamine signaling drops faster than most people expect. The brain does not respond with pain, but with searching behavior. Restlessness appears, emotional reactivity increases, irritability surfaces without a clear cause. Many people describe it as feeling unsettled, even though they are not physically hungry. This confusion is important to understand. Your stomach may be calm, your blood sugar may be stable, but your brain is reacting to the absence of a familiar stimulus it had learned to depend on. This phenomenon is known as hedonic hunger, appetite driven by habit and emotional expectation rather than true nutritional need. This is where sugar withdrawal is often misunderstood. Strong cravings are interpreted as proof that sugar was essential. In reality, they signal adaptation reversing itself. Chronic sugar intake dulls dopamine receptor sensitivity over time, forcing the brain to seek stronger stimulation for the same effect. When sugar is removed, those receptors begin resensitizing. That process feels uncomfortable because the nervous system is resetting its baseline. In practical terms, the intensity of cravings often reflects how actively the brain is repairing its reward circuitry. This phase can resemble mild withdrawal, not because sugar is toxic, but because it had become a shortcut for mood regulation. Neuroimaging studies consistently show that repeated sugar exposure narrows dopamine pathways, reducing responsiveness. When stimulation stops, those pathways begin reopening, but during that transition, the brain temporarily struggles to interpret pleasure accurately. This is why the first 3 days frequently feel emotionally chaotic. You are not depleted. You are not starving. You are rewiring systems that have relied on artificial signals for years. The timing of this discomfort is not random. It appears before any meaningful improvement in energy, metabolism, or clarity, because neural recalibration always comes first. Underneath the cravings and irritability, a constructive process is already underway. Your nervous system is relearning how to regulate mood without sharp external spikes. As dopamine signaling stabilizes, cravings fade naturally, not through discipline or willpower, but because the stimulus is no longer demanded. By the 4th day, many people notice that the emotional intensity softens, not dramatically, quietly. And once again, the kidneys continue leading the physical side of the transition. As insulin remains lower, sodium and excess fluid continue leaving the body. This is why early visible changes often appear in the face. Reduced puffiness in the morning, clearer contours, lighter eyelids. These changes are often mistaken for fat loss, but they represent something more immediate: reduced metabolic load. For clarity, this early shift is not fat burning. Each gram of stored glycogen binds several grams of water. When insulin drops, glycogen storage decreases, and the water bound to it exits rapidly. This is why losing 1 to 3 kilograms in the first week is common. However, this rapid change comes with an important physiological consequence. As water leaves, electrolytes leave with it, including sodium, potassium, and magnesium. Without replacement, this imbalance produces dizziness, fatigue, and the heavy, foggy sensation many people describe as sugar flu. A common mistake at this stage is assuming that drinking more water will solve the problem. Hydration without minerals can actually worsen symptoms. The solution is not sugar, it is electrolyte awareness. Small adjustments such as mineral water, leafy greens, or adequate sodium intake often stabilize internal chemistry quickly and gently. Once this balance returns, kidney function becomes smoother and more energy efficient than before. The sense of physical lightness deepens, the abdomen feels less bloated, the face appears clearer, not because fat has disappeared, but because the body is no longer compensating for constant insulin signaling. This marks the completion of the first phase, and it prepares the body for what comes next. A deeper question about how it fuels itself. Around day 7, the body begins shifting its fuel hierarchy, moving away from sugar dependence toward more flexible energy use. That transition changes how energy feels, how the brain functions, and how the body sustains itself throughout the day. But that shift only becomes possible because of the regulatory corrections that happen first. The kidneys decompress, dopamine recalibrates, fluid balance stabilizes. The early discomfort is not a setback, it is the groundwork. Before we continue, remember that this is about understanding how the body responds, not about rules or prescriptions. Everyone's context is different, and if you're managing a condition or using medications that affect blood sugar or fluid balance, these shifts are best approached with guidance. The goal here is clarity, not pressure. And if exploring how the body actually works in real life helps you make better sense of your own signals, subscribing to the channel simply means staying curious and informed, without extremes or fear. By the time you reach day 7 without sugar, something confusing often happens. The early physical relief is still there, but your energy no longer feels reliable. Some hours feel fine, others feel strangely flat. Your thoughts may feel slower, less sharp, almost as if a mental fog has rolled in without warning. This phase unsettles many people because it arrives just as they expect improvement to accelerate. But this is not a setback. It is metabolic friction. For most of your life, glucose has been your body's default fuel. It is quick to access, easy to burn, and constantly replenished when sugar is present. Now that sugar intake has stopped and glycogen reserves are largely depleted, your body is forced to make a decision it has postponed for years. It must change how it produces energy. At this point, the liver steps into a role it was designed for but rarely asked to perform in modern eating patterns. It begins producing glucose internally through a process called gluconeogenesis. This is not dietary sugar. It is freshly synthesized fuel created to protect tissues that still require glucose to survive. Red blood cells, certain kidney structures, and specific brain regions cannot function without it. So the liver becomes a careful distributor, releasing glucose slowly and strategically instead of allowing constant surges. This shift feels uncomfortable because your system is moving from convenience to efficiency. Fast energy is being replaced by controlled energy. The unpredictability you feel is the sound of that transition taking place. This is also the point where many people misunderstand fatigue. They assume something is wrong, when in reality, their energy hierarchy is being rewritten. As gluconeogenesis stabilizes, enzymes responsible for breaking down fat increase their activity. Fatty acids become more available. Muscles begin learning how to use them as a primary fuel. Meanwhile, mitochondria are forced to adapt. They increase efficiency, producing steadier energy with fewer spikes and crashes. But this adaptation does not happen instantly. It requires cellular remodeling. And remodeling always feels uncomfortable before it feels better. The brain, in particular, resists this transition. For years, it has relied heavily on glucose for rapid signaling. Now it is being introduced to ketones, a cleaner burning fuel that delivers energy more slowly but more consistently. Neurons need time to accept this shift. During that window, concentration feels harder, memory feels less responsive, and motivation can dip. This is not damage, it is recalibration. Brain fog at this stage is not a sign of deficiency. It is evidence that your nervous system is learning a new metabolic language. What often surprises people is the timing. The mental fog tends to peak right before clarity improves. Once adaptation begins to settle, energy becomes smoother. Not higher, but more stable. The sharp highs and sudden crashes tied to sugar-driven metabolism start to disappear. Hunger becomes quieter. Mood becomes less reactive. Many people describe this as feeling more even, less pushed and pulled by internal signals they cannot explain. This is metabolic flexibility returning, a state the human body evolved to maintain but modern diets rarely allow. As this transition continues toward day 10, another system begins to change quietly: inflammation regulation. With fewer glucose spikes, inflammatory signaling decreases. Blood vessels experience less stress. Tissues that were constantly managing low-grade irritation finally get a break. This does not show up as dramatic pain relief overnight. It shows up subtly. Joints feel less stiff in the morning. Skin tone looks calmer. Recovery after movement feels easier. These are not cosmetic effects. They are downstream consequences of metabolic load decreasing. At the same time, collagen and connective tissue begin functioning under less glycation pressure. Excess sugar binds to proteins and stiffens them over time. When sugar is removed, this process slows. Flexibility returns gradually, not because anything new was added, but because something damaging was taken away. Energy that was previously spent managing inflammation is now redirected toward repair. Mitochondria experience less oxidative stress and operate more efficiently. This efficiency feels like quiet vitality rather than excitement. Emotionally, this period often marks a shift. The constant pull toward stimulation weakens. Food becomes less emotionally charged. Eating feels simpler. You stop chasing relief and start responding to real hunger cues. This is not discipline. It is signaling accuracy returning. The body is no longer shouting over insulin and dopamine noise. It is speaking more clearly. By the end of this phase, most people notice that their relationship with energy has changed. They may not feel boosted, but they feel steadier, less reactive, less driven by sudden urges. This stability sets the stage for what comes next, a phase where appetite signals realign, taste perception changes, and the body begins operating from a new baseline rather than constant correction. But none of that would be possible without this middle phase, where the body learns how to function without leaning on sugar as a crutch. By the time you approach day 10 without sugar, the internal noise begins to quiet, not dramatically, but noticeably. The mental fog that peaked earlier starts thinning, and in its place a different kind of awareness appears. Thoughts feel steadier, emotional swings soften. You may not feel energized in an exciting way, but you feel less dragged around by sudden drops or cravings. This shift signals that the metabolic transition is no longer chaotic, it is stabilizing. And as it does, another layer of physiology begins to change quietly beneath the surface, one that affects inflammation, tissue repair, and how your body ages over time. For years, excess glucose has been binding to proteins through a process known as glycation. These bonds stiffen collagen, weaken elastin, and create compounds that accelerate wear across tissues. This damage is slow and invisible, which is why it often goes unnoticed. When sugar intake is removed, glycation pressure drops, not instantly, but measurably. Collagen fibers begin operating under less stress. Connective tissue regains a degree of flexibility. Joints feel less tight when you move. Skin tone looks calmer. These are not surface-level changes. They are the downstream effects of a system no longer being constantly irritated. At the same time, inflammatory signaling continues to decline. Repeated sugar spikes elevate cytokines, small chemical messengers that amplify inflammation throughout the body. When those spikes disappear, cytokine activity reduces. Blood vessels experience less oxidative stress. Tissues are no longer forced to manage constant microinflammation. The result is subtle but consistent. Recovery feels easier. Morning stiffness decreases. Facial redness softens. Breakouts often lessen. None of this happens because something new was added. It happens because a chronic irritant was removed. As inflammation quiets, energy allocation inside the body shifts. Mitochondria, previously strained by constant glucose fluctuations, begin operating more efficiently. With less oxidative damage to manage, they produce energy with less waste. This efficiency does not feel like excitement. It feels like durability. You notice that your energy lasts longer without effort. You crash less often. Small tasks feel easier to sustain. This is not stimulation. It is metabolic relief. Around this time, appetite signaling also begins to change. With insulin staying lower and more stable, the brain becomes more responsive to leptin, the hormone responsible for signaling fullness. High sugar intake interferes with leptin's message, creating the illusion of constant hunger. As that interference fades, satiety returns earlier and more reliably. Many people are surprised to find themselves naturally eating less without trying, not because of restraint, but because the signal finally arrives on time. Taste perception follows soon after. Taste buds renew themselves roughly every 10 days. By the end of this period, cells dulled by constant sweetness have largely been replaced. Natural flavors begin to register more clearly. Foods that once tasted bland now feel rich. Subtle sweetness becomes noticeable again. This sensory recalibration is one reason cravings continue to weaken. Sugar no longer dominates the reward system. It loses its emotional leverage. Inside the brain, another quiet shift is taking place. Sugar reduction is associated with increased availability of BDNF, a growth factor that supports learning, memory, and neural resilience. As this environment improves, thinking feels clearer. Mood becomes less reactive. Emotional eating loses its grip. You stop using food to manage stimulation because your nervous system no longer needs it for regulation. This change is not discipline. It is capacity returning. By day 14, many people notice something deeper than physical improvement. Their perception changes. Food feels simpler. Hunger feels more honest. Energy feels predictable. You are no longer constantly adjusting for spikes and crashes. The body has moved from correction to baseline. Sugar is no longer central. It is optional. And for some, it no longer even feels appealing. This does not mean sugar must be eliminated forever. The purpose of this process is not restriction, it is clarity. 14 days without sugar act as a biological mirror. They show you how your body behaves when it is not constantly compensating. From that place of awareness, decisions become easier. Some people choose moderation, others choose continued avoidance. Both are valid when chosen consciously. What matters most is understanding what changed. Dopamine recalibrated, fluid balance normalized, inflammation decreased, appetite signals realigned, taste perception reset, energy stabilized. None of this happened because of willpower. It happened because biology was allowed to function without interference. And that is the real outcome of this process. Not weight loss, not discipline, but a clearer conversation between your body and your choices. When people talk about quitting sugar, the conversation usually ends with willpower, rules, or extremes. But what you've seen here is something very different. Over these 14 days, your body didn't fight you. It reorganized itself. Dopamine recalibrated, fluid pressure normalized, inflammation softened, appetite signals regained accuracy, taste perception reset. Energy stopped spiking and crashing and began settling into something more predictable. None of this required force. It happened because interference was removed. And that is the real insight. The human body is not fragile or confused. It is adaptive, precise, and constantly working toward balance when given the chance. 14 days without sugar is not a prescription or a challenge to prove discipline. It's a diagnostic window, a way to see how your body behaves when it's no longer compensating for constant stimulation. What you do with that awareness is personal. Some people reintroduce sugar moderately. Others realize they no longer want it the way they once did. Both outcomes are valid when they come from clarity instead of compulsion. The goal was never perfection, it was understanding. And if learning how your body actually responds helps you make calmer, more informed choices in everyday life, that's what our channel is here for. We explore physiology as it shows up in real routines, real habits, and real bodies, without hype and without fear. If this perspective resonates with you, subscribing simply means continuing that exploration with us. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.